Hello and welcome. Welcome to Everything is Energy and welcome to the weekly astrology forecast. This is for the week of Sunday, July 5th through Saturday, July 11th. I'm actually recording this on July 3rd to get it out early, and I want to give a shout out to what's going on right now as I'm recording, which is actually going to be last week. There was a extraordinary amount of movement last week that really culminated on July 4th with a conjunction between Mars and Uranus in Gemini. But there was so much going on last week, and I just kind of want to give us a frame of reference here for this week, July 5th to 11th, and that's why I'm bringing this up because there was a lot of amount of movement last week, and that created a really highly uh, activated and electric and potentially disruptive atmosphere. Disruption not being a bad thing, disruption being a Uranus thing. And Uranus reminding us that we are the change that we seek, that we're the technology. But this week, the astrology is asking us a different question. It's asking us, how do we tend to what has been awakened, both, especially last week, but also in general? And, transformation isn't only about that moment of breakthrough, it's also about what happens, what we choose afterward. The choices we make, the structures we build, conversations we revisit, the ways we care for the body and the nervous system while we're adapting to this changing landscape that's going to continue to change for the foreseeable future. Um, so, it, you know, uh, the sun's going to continue moving through Cancer this week, and Mercury's going to remain in retrograde in Cancer for most of this month. I talk about that um in the July energetic overview. So have a look at that if you haven't seen that. There's just the high notes of what's happening instead of all these little things. But we have a couple big events here, and Neptune's going to station retrograde this week. So we have two retrogradations, and then on July 9th, Venus is entering into Virgo, so that also feels significant. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up before we get into the aspects is the energy is kind of shifting toward refinement with Venus and Virgo. And let's go ahead and, last week may have been an awakening. I just want to say this week more feels like tending to the garden. I live on a farm, as many of you know. What I do on the farm in the garden after the windstorm has come through, or something like that. Like, just how do you support, nourish, and celebrate? So let's go ahead and walk through the week. Let's start with Sunday, July 5th. Sunday the 5th is a day of aligning the heart, the mind, and the will. We have Mercury semi-sextile to Venus around 4 a.m. on Sunday, and that begins the week with a subtle conversation. That's what a semi-sextile is. Mercury is in Cancer. Venus is in late Leo. She hasn't gone into Virgo yet. And, Mercury in Cancer is reflective and emotionally oriented. Venus in Leo at the anaretic degree wants warmth and creativity and appreciation and heartfelt expression. And because Mercury is retrograde, that might bring us back to some kind of a communication, conversation, feeling, creative idea, mercurial things, um, that deserves another look. Even a relationship dynamic might deserve another look here. And, perhaps there's something that you wanted to say, but you couldn't quite find the words for. Perhaps you're reconsidering what you value, the sense of balance in your life, perhaps maybe even an understanding of a relationship or a creative project is changing and evolving. So, the semi-sextile is subtle. It doesn't force resolution, that aspect. It simply asks us to listen more carefully to the relationship between what we feel and what we say. We also have on Sunday, Mars is trining Pluto, and that's just later in the morning, around 9 a.m. in the morning. And this is the energy, Mars and Pluto is going to bring a consistently more powerful energy. Mars, in Gemini is trining Pluto in Aquarius. And this is a highly dynamic kind of air sign situation, bringing together action and information and communication and strategy and technology and dot, 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 collective transformation. Mars wants action, Mars wants movement, but Pluto wants depth, and Pluto also wants transformation. But Pluto in Aquarius is wanting transformation in a circular power way versus it just came out of Capricorn in a top-down power. So together, this is really going to help um, this aspect. The trine is a flow of energy, and this is going to help us, direct our energy toward meaningful change. And after the Mars-Uranus conjunction that I mentioned was taking place the previous day on July 4th, this aspect is really, my sense is it's really might help us work constructively with whatever was revealed or whatever was disrupted in our sense of what's going on the 4th. So the question is, what can I do with what I now know? And this is really excellent energy for strategy, for research, even for those types of conversations that might not have felt super comfortable or were a little bit challenging. It's also really great energy just in general for problem solving and for transforming old patterns of thought. Love that one. I don't know that I always love it when I'm in a transformational process, but boy, do I really appreciate the process of letting go of things that might be a little bit stuck. The caution with this aspect is we could try not to be too controlling or too overly obsessive about things. And what I would say here on Monday is use the power, don't let the power use you. One of the things I like to say is, how can I harness this energy? What can I channel it toward? How can I keep whatever's going on and direct it very consciously? That's kind of what's up on Sunday. Let's get to Monday, July 6th. Monday, July 6th is the day of structure and limits and the wisdom of reality. And that's because we've got some Saturn stuff happening. But let me first get to what's happening at around 1 a.m. We have Mercury by quintile the North Node. Mercury again is in retrograde, and the biquintile is a subtle energy, but I would pay attention to unusual connections between the past and the future, as in an old idea might actually become relevant again in a new way, or a conversation that we had in the past might illuminate the next steps that we're going to be wanting to take. Or even something that is in a general way, like something that we may have dismissed, may deserve some reconsideration. Mercury retrograde often brings us in revision, right? That's what a retrograde is, review, revise, but it's not there to keep us there. We return because there's some nugget there. There's something useful for us to discover. At 7 a.m., we have the Sun square Saturn. And as I mentioned at the top of this day, this is the dominant aspect of the day. Sun in Cancer squaring Saturn in Aries. And so Sun in Cancer, Cancer seeks safety and emotional connection. Cancer is the crab, the soft inside with the hard outer shell. Cancer wants belonging. Cancer wants emotional well-being. Aries wants autonomy. Aries wants action. Aries wants forward momentum. And Saturn is in Aries, and this is asking us, excuse me, to really confront what is sustainable. Saturn is, I call it the planet of karma. Many people think it's this planet of restriction, and it is but it's restricting because of the word that I'm choosing here, sustainable. It wants us to really be able to build something sound in the world. So that we may feel a little bit blocked here on Monday, or tired, or delayed, or aware of responsibilities that can't be ignored. All Saturnian type of stuff. But Saturn is not just an obstacle, as I was saying. Saturn asks us, what are we willing to build slowly? So there's a difference between something being difficult or challenging, and something being incorrect or wrong. And this is a good day, I would say, for some mature assessment. Honor your limits, honor your boundaries, clarify your responsibilities, create structure around what matters to you. Let's go to Tuesday, July 7th. We have Neptune stationing retrograde in Aries. This is one of the major events of the week. Neptune, is stationing retrograde in some of the earliest degrees of Aries. I mentioned in the June forecast that this retrogradation is operational until December of this year. It's never going to leave Aries. It's going to go from 4 degrees to 1 degree, but we still have, this is the beginning of this experience of Neptune. And it's really kind of interesting to think about the door swinging open here. So check out some of the themes here. Um, Neptune is a very slow moving planet, and this is going to be felt for, as I said, the rest of 2026. And, it's worth remembering that Neptune only recently entered Aries as part of all the outer planets changing signs. It just did so earlier in 2026. And when it did so, it was beginning this kind of entirely new chapter around vision, around identity, around spirituality and ideology and imagination. And, the vision and the dreams that inspire us to do and be and become. Now, Neptune turning retrograde is really giving us an opportunity to ask, what dream am I actually following? What is truly mine? What vision of the future inspires me? And what may simply be projection or illusion? When I talked about Neptune retrograde in the July video, I was talking about this idea of projection and how one of the ways of Neptune retrogradation can inspire us and heal us is it helps us to see what's ours and what have we been projecting onto others. And, it's also worth noting that Neptune and Aries is beginning a very long story. Aries being the first sign of the zodiac. So this is also a part of something that's going to take a whole Neptune cycle, hundreds and hundreds of years for us to really complete. We're only at the opening pages of Neptune and Aries, and then of Neptune's whole journey around the zodiac. So it's interesting that we have this retrograde period right now at the top of this transition and in 2026. And so, really, it's an early opportunity to reflect on our visions, to reflect on our movements and our identities and the ideals that are beginning to emerge in this new era that we are co-creating. Personally, this can be a really beautiful time, opportunity for spiritual reflection, dream work, meditation, creative exploration. But I will say, because Neptune is a planet of illusion and delusion, it also requires discernment, energetic awareness. Not every compelling vision is meant to become a reality. Sometimes we need to sit with a dream long enough to discover whether or not it actually has roots. And the metaphor that reminds me is like deeply rooted and able to blow in the breeze and still sustain ourselves. Also on July 7th, we have the Sun sesquiquadrate, the North Node. This is just before 5 p.m. on Tuesday. And that's a minor tension aspect with the North Node. The Sun it's a sesquiquadrate is minor tension. And this can create a subtle feeling that we might need to adjust our course. We may not know exactly what the next step is, but that is 100% okay. And so now that we have both Mercury and Neptune in retrograde, this is not necessarily a week for forcing things, for forcing certainty specifically. Sometimes alignment begins by recognizing what no longer feels aligned, and that can be enough. It's not like we have to understand there's a problem and then find the solution immediately. Just having that knowing that something needs to shift. Let's move to Wednesday, July 8th. This is a day of beauty and imagination and honestly creative healing. We have Venus at around 3:30 in the morning, biquintile Neptune. And so Venus right now at this point in the week is in the final degrees of Leo, and biquintile is a really beautiful creative aspect with Neptune and Aries. And this is really lovely energy for music and art and meditation and imagination and beauty and spiritual connection. It's also really beautiful energy for equanimity and justice and harmony and balance. And because Neptune, again, is just stationed retrograde, this aspect might also reconnect us with an old dream or some kind of a creative longing that we have for the world that we want to see or something that we want to do. So this sense of something that may have once inspired us might come across our radar once again. A forgotten part of ourselves might ask us for attention. And this aspect is not necessarily about productivity. It's about remembering what moves you, what makes you feel alive. Is there some thing that is asking us to notice it? Let's keep going to Thursday, July 9th. This is a day that we move from radiance to refinement. And it's a very important transition day. We start off around 2:30 in the morning. Venus is sesquiquadrate Saturn. So before she leaves Leo, she's encountering Saturn right here. And this can be a moment for us to have some emotional seriousness or some seriousness about balance and justice and harmony. Questions may arise around those themes, and perhaps we recognize that, you know, with this sesquiquadrate to Saturn, that inspiration isn't enough, that certain things need structure, maybe a practical plan, maybe a commitment of some sort on our part. And, this aspect I feel is really where Venus is preparing for Virgo. And, with Venus, the heart in Leo, it's about expressing from our heart. So there's an opportunity here for us to express from our heart. And on this same day, Venus enters Virgo. And so this is a beautiful transition within a larger story that we've been following. Jupiter has just entered Leo, and that's amplifying our creativity, confidence, and self-expression. I think I spoke about that last week. But Venus entering Virgo is reminding us that the things we love also require tending and attention. And, Leo and Virgo are very different energies. Leo is heart-centered and ambulant, and Virgo is associated with discernment and detail-oriented things and health and service. Everything that Virgo it gets a bad rap because it can get really detail-oriented, but it's only doing so because it wants the best for everybody. You, me, and everybody. And Virgo is actually here, I think, reminding us about the intelligence of the small stuff, the little things we do. So Venus and Virgo is asking, how do we care for what we love? How do we turn our inspiration into something that we practice and create? How do we make beauty and love and harmony and justice and balance a part of our daily lives? And this is, in this aspect, I feel there's a theme that I've been realizing that this earth and sky, as you guys know, I'm an herbalist and we grow a bunch of herbs up here, and it's uncanny to me the way that the herbs integrate themselves with the astrology. And here it's just the astrology, the sky, the cosmos may inspire us, but our life is lived here, our life is lived on this planet, our life is lived in our daily practices through the meals that we prepare, through the plants we tend, through the work we refine, through the ways that we care for our bodies, the attention that we give to the people and the projects that we love, essentially. So Venus and Virgo is reminding us that, devotion can also be very practical. The little things. I'll just close with that. We're still on Thursday. We have Mercury semi-square Mars around 3 p.m. on Thursday the 9th. And that's semi-square is a pretty tense aspect. So put a pin in to realize if there's a tendency for reactive communication on this day around this time. Um, because there's this tendency that we might speak before fully understanding what it is that we're feeling. Um, and so, Mars is in fast moving Gemini, Mercury is in emotional Cancer. The mind and emotions may operate at different speeds. So I would just say pause before responding. And I often ask myself, do I really need to get back to this right now? Maybe something doesn't need to be answered immediately. Maybe just give it a little bit of time. Let's keep going to Friday, July 10th. This is a day of healing through the small things, which is picking up on the theme of Venus and Virgo that we just kind of highlighted. And, for me, I sense that this is one of the most meaningful days of the week. We have Venus trining Chiron close to 2 a.m. And this is really cool because almost immediately after she's entering into Virgo, she's forming an Earth trine with Chiron, which, if you remember, Chiron's newly in Taurus. And I just find this incredibly beautiful because Chiron and Taurus, if you remember, it is inspiring us to begin a new healing journey with ourselves, with the body, with our sense of self-worth, also with our nourishment and our resources and our relationship to the earth and to this physical world, to this physical reality. And, Venus in Virgo with this trine is reminding us that healing happens through care, through those things that feel mundane, through those kind of quiet moments where I often like to say when no one's looking, through our food, through our rest, through our gardens, through touch, through routines, through medicine, through movement. And these are all kind of daily choices where we signal to ourselves and to the world around us, but specifically to ourselves first. This is about tending to self so that we can tend to others. And it's telling ourselves, I'm listening to you. I'm listening to myself. So this isn't necessarily a dramatic type of healing, but it's a very intimate type of healing. And it's the kind that happens gradually because we begin treating ourselves differently, attending to ourselves. We also have Venus opposing the North Node around 3:30 in the morning. That's right on the heels of that first aspect. And the North Node is in Pisces. And this is bringing, relationships, values, health, service, daily practices, those themes of Venus and Virgo into conversation with where we're headed, our larger direction, the North Node. And Venus in Pisces is asking us to balance discernment and surrender, to balance those practices and our sense of faith and trust and hope, to balance the practicality of those little routines that I just spoke about and the mystical things that we're remembering, the reason why our soul incarnated in this body in this lifetime. And really, honestly, I think we all sense at this juncture we absolutely need both. So perhaps the question today, or at least at this point, is what daily practice supports the future that I say that I want? We have one more aspect on Friday, and that is the North Node is sextiling Chiron. So you'll notice that Chiron is active twice on Friday. And this is pretty cool. And so is the North Node, right? So this is a supportive connection, a sextile. And, this is about having healing Chiron and future direction North Node working together. So something we are attending at this point in the week and in our lives may have significance, excuse me, beyond what we can currently see. And I'm going to get back to the notion that small changes matter, that our body matters, that the way that we care for ourselves absolutely matters. Let's close the week with Saturday, July 11th. This is a day of staying flexible within the change that we're living. We have the sun semi-square to Uranus just before 8 a.m. Sun is still in Cancer. Semi-square is a tense, but it's a minor aspect. Uranus is in Gemini. So there may be a sense of restlessness or maybe just some kind of unexpected change in our plans. And, This is interesting because Cancer often wants familiarity. The sun's in Cancer. Uranus wants revolution and something new. So I would say notice where you might be being asked to become more flexible without abandoning what genuinely supports you. And I would say that change and safety don't need to be opposites. And, part of our collective work here might be learning to create forms of safety that are flexible enough to evolve. I'm not saying that I know quite what that is, but I feel like the circular notion of Pluto and Aquarius. Let's keep going. Around 8:30 on Saturday, Venus is semi-sextile to Jupiter. And this is a subtle connection. Venus and newly in Virgo, Jupiter and Leo, as I mentioned. Jupiter says dream bigger, use your heart, you're worth it, have courage. Venus in Virgo says begin with what you can do to what you can tend and the small steps that you can take today. And I love this combination so much. When I saw this, this really like helps me feel in my skin. On the one hand, we need the vision. We need the sense that there's wonderful things afoot. On the other hand, we need the daily practice. We need the courage to imagine the larger life, and we need the humility to just take the small next step. And, really for me, this feels like the bridge between inspiration and embodiment, inspiration and co-creation. Again, between sky and earth. So, in sum, this week is going to bring us from the acceleration of last week into a period of reflection and discernment and integration. And, we are beginning at the top of the week with power and momentum of Mars trining Pluto. We're encountering some limits in structure when the sun squares Saturn. Neptune stationing retrograde is asking us to examine the dreams and that are guiding our actions. And then when Venus enters Virgo this week, this is turning our attention to the little things, the daily rituals, the practices, the acts of care that is really going to be the place where we're putting the pieces together. So if last week asked, who am I becoming as this new chapter begins, this week says, how will I tend to, how will I care for what is becoming? And perhaps that, if that feels really resonant for me, because it's one of the deeper truths of transformation, the breakthrough is only the beginning. What changes our lives is what we choose, we're the creators. Everything we do matters. What we choose to tend to after we've had a breakthrough. And a gift becomes an offering through refinement. A body becomes a home through care. A dream becomes a life through practice. So I think this week the invitation is really wonderfully simple. It's inviting us to tend to what we want to become. Have a blessed week. I'm super grateful for you. Bright blessings and so much love.